Good morning and welcome to NeoConnect 2020. NeoConnect is NeoCon's online series of resources, programming, and events held throughout the month of June. I'm Monica DiBartolo, NeoCon's Director of Programming, and I want to thank you for joining us. Today's session is approved for 1 CEU credit for interior designers and 1 LU for architects. It is also being recorded so you can access it on demand. You can find more details in the middle of your screen. So let's get started. Today's session, Creating a Strategy for a Cohesive Future at the Intersection of Real Estate and Design, will present a comprehensive case study. The study involves a corporation seeking to not only gain efficiency in real estate, but also to create better alignment between business, people, and workplace design. Our 3 amazing speakers include Alexis Kim. As SmithGroup's workplace strategist, Alexis describes one of her roles as taking a deeper dive to understand the strategic goals of a client, which informs the kind of design strategies that are more holistic to help propel them into the future. Alexis is driven to create solutions that respond to a changing world that is much more connected. With over 2 decades of leadership in design and strategy, she has helped numerous clients, including Ford Motor Company, Allied Financial, Disney, Balfour Beatty, and Under Armour. She has also contributed her expertise to research and as a presenter at national conferences, including NeoCon, Future Offices, IFMA, and South by Southwest EDU. Andrew Cheney is one of 8 exclusive members of the National Tenant Representation Arm of Lee & Associates, Lee Corporate Solutions, based in Phoenix, Arizona. Andrew has completed over 1,200 transactions totaling over 5 million square feet and valued in excess of $1 billion. Andrew's experience includes representing national tenants such as Motorola, JDA Software, Balfour Beatty, and HDR Engineering. Andrew holds leadership roles within elite organizations such as SIOR and NAIOP. Andrew has served as the 2018 NAIOP Arizona Chapter Chairman of the Board and is one of 33 professionals worldwide who hold the CRE, CCIM, and SIOR designations. Mark Adams is Vice President and Workplace Studio Leader in the Phoenix office of SmithGroup. With over 30 years of experience, he has led projects as Principal in Charge, Program and Project Manager, and Principal Designer. Mark has had the pleasure of working with a wide variety of clients that include Microsoft, American Express, General Motors, GoDaddy, Republic Services, Delta Airlines, Wells Fargo, Chase, Discover Financial Services, Northern Trust, and Balfour Beatty. Mark is well-versed in all aspects of design and has significant experience in leading staff to ensure the success of client objectives. He is an award-winning designer who has contributed his expertise as a presenter at conferences such as NeoCon, Tradeline, IFMA, Hornet Global, SIOR, and others, and as a contributing editor to the AIA's Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice. And now I'm delighted to turn the program over to Mark Adams.
Monica, thank you very much. We appreciate that introduction. As I take a moment here to share our information in our screen, I want to talk a little bit about, first off, thanking everybody this morning for joining us. I know we have what I understand to be a large crowd, which we truly appreciate. Hopefully this morning you're going to hear a lot about a very strategic approach to guiding an industry leader, Balfour Beatty, in making smart business decisions for their future, for their offices, and an understanding of how strategy is extremely important as it relates to the development of that. Balfour is a group that is UK based. has about 29 offices in the United States, about 3,900 employees, and in excess of about 300,000 plus square feet in the United States. About a year ago, Belfer came to Lee and Associates, and Andrew is going to be talking about that briefly here in a minute. And then we were brought on board as well as one of the strategic partners to basically, again, as I said, take them through a process to get them to a developed guide plate and guide plates and a strategy for not only enhancing their real estate and consolidating their real estate to some extent, but basically making their real estate and their offices better spaces for their employees. They were very concerned about attraction and retention. And we were brought on board to basically, as a team, very cohesively put together this package for them. And I think that what you're going to see today is really a broader look at not just furniture standards or space-based standards, but cultural standards, and a deeper look at how organizations can, through the benefit of working together with strategic teams like this, to get a better outcome and to understand what that future actually looks like. So with that, we're going to take you through that process. Andrew is going to talk very much about what that real estate end looks like, what some of their strategies and initial strategies look like, and then at that point in time, Alexis and I will really take you through the design process, leading with the strategy, and what that formulation of strategy was to get them to the end goal, and then show you a little bit about what was the makeup of an end product that gave them their guide plates, so that their regional leaders would be well informed, have a great understanding about what the office space should look like. There's a brand identity that would be apparent in each one of the offices. But at the same point in time, they have the ability to kind of flex and take on some regional aspects that give it a little bit of a feel for their own. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew.
All right, Mark, thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for having me. Although I haven't been to NeoCon before, I do want you all to know that I have some NeoCon street credit. I did marry into the NeoCon family. My wife works for a dealer out here, an all-steel dealer out here in Phoenix, Arizona. So I have heard about, going to the mart and having people step into your Instagram shot and you're trying to get a cool shot. And the happy hours that are supposed to start at 4 o'clock that sometimes start at noon or 1. So I hope to make it there next year. I'm bummed I couldn't make it this year, but I hear it's just quite a truly great event. So we're going to talk Balfour Beatty today, and it's a really interesting case study, I think, and clearly SmithGroup does as well. And there's a lot of nuances that we'll try to get through, and we'll share with you throughout. But like Mark said, Balfour Beatty is the #1 contractor in the UK, and they've got a growing presence in the United States, and they do incredible work from. They're working on, I'm sure some small TI carpet job somewhere, up to they're building Microsoft's new campus up in Seattle and working on LAX's expansion. So really sophisticated group, contractor group, and it is interesting because they're United States real estate. The real estate director is essentially a hybrid of someone in the United States and someone in the UK, and basically. They woke up one day and said, we feel like we're just paying a little bit too much in office space. And while some of the offices are cool, there's a lot that they're on their 3rd generation, don't look that great, don't look great for the new generation of workers coming in. And so we feel that there's really an opportunity to come in and make our space cooler and right size. So if you want to go to the next slide, Mark. So all these points here are something they put together, but they said, you know what, we want to come up with a 3-year plan to figure out how to right size our portfolio and how to run a smooth real estate process. Because what was happening before was there was lots of well-meaning individuals all across the country putting these lease deals together, sometimes at the last minute, sometimes just, you know, taking the easy card, and then the business changes and throughout all that. And so, you know, not unlike some of us wake up in our 40s or 50s and our waistline's a little bit bigger than it should be. They woke up and said, wow, we really have to take a look at this. So let's bring in a brokerage team to help us guide us through that. And then from there, the team grew, and we brought on SmithGroup to help us with this design. So it really, to simplify, it came down to dollars and cents, and then recruiting and having cool space. This slide just shows the framework for the property team, and you can see there's several players involved. Up in the right-hand corner is myself and my partner John DeCudo out of Atlanta. We run the U.S. account together, and that's our support staff. And you can see how we cover a lot of their cities. And then in the lower left in blue are all the Balfour Beatty players, and it's not just one CFO and a president and a real estate guy shoving decisions down the pipeline. It's a very interactive. They give their local business, regional business unit leaders some say in how they want their offices to look and power. And so it had been more decentralized, and with this, it's become more centralized and more integrated. This is just a look at their portfolio, which Mark was saying is right around 30 offices nationwide. What's also interesting is they have, just like a lot of groups, they have different departments and different business lines that work differently. So construction would be closer to a sales organization. These are GCs going out, winning work, bidding in and more transient. And then, as I mentioned on the LAX project, that's more civil engineering groups, and that needs a lot of focus space, and there's been more cellular offices in the past. And then with the BBI, that's in investments, and similar to civils, where it's really a lot of focus work. And so we looked at their offices over the next few years, and actually, and certainly even beyond, to see where there's some opportunities to right size. This is a lot of numbers all on one slide that we don't expect you to memorize and get, but the takeaways here are, and part of the process, actually before they came to us, and we've done a study since, is they did a bed check, and they wanted to see how all of our spaces actually utilized. And so for 2 weeks, they had each office record at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. each day how many people are in cubes, are in offices, and in conference rooms. And then they recorded how that looked, compared that to the head count. And the bar graph, you see the different colors are the different business units. But we split those up and told them, okay, well, all these offices over here, these are between 200 and 300 square feet per person. On down the road, we even had one where they downsized, and it was nearly 1,000 square feet per person. And so you look at the average here, and their portfolio was at, on average, 431 square feet per person, when they were really trying to get closer to 1 per 200. This is a case study. Before they brought us on, they had tried this in the Dallas office, where they had gone to more of an open plan and trying to save space, and it actually consolidated. They consolidated from 5 floors into 2. And part of what they're trying to do and get buy-in across the portfolio, they have a quote here from their Texas president, was to have him talk about how going from an office to a cube wasn't the end of the world, and it was actually quite nice. And he brought in another example of the HR folks who never thought that they could be out of an office in an open queues because they didn't think anyone would feel comfortable talking to them. And what happened was the opposite, where they did feel more comfortable at just having casual interactions with them. And so with this, they were able to get down closer to that 1 per 200 square foot mark. So we wanted to build off of this. In our guide, we, along with the UK director, looked at their portfolio across the board, and to the left of the screen, inefficient space, you could see where they actually were storing extra boxes. In Plantation, I think this is a pretty large office. and just some unused space. Dallas was an example of a more efficient space, and then the UK was a bit extreme. We all know that the UK is one of the most expensive property markets in the world, and so for that fact, you just have to pack more people in, and so that's at 1 per 90. So the US folks put up their hands and said, hey, we're not going to be like the UK, but we'll work with you, but we're not going to go way down. And so we looked at some examples here. And then as far as part of our strategy, we went through each of their offices and visited them, looked at the floor plans, analyzed all the leases, the status of ownership and what was going on, what was going in the market. In some offices, there was an opportunity to do something right away because of various conditions. Some there weren't, but we went through each city and did a head count and said, okay, this is what you have, this is what you need. And either there's an opportunity right now or there's one coming up. And so this is these are the city by city sheets that we put together. So following that, we got together, and at the end of this plan, we said, okay, well, the next step is we need to bring on someone who can actually make this space cool and help us sell it to the student body, and also let's set in place our new consistent process that we perform not 6 months before the lease is up, but more like 12 to 18. So we actually have time and leverage, and you can see we've got a gated process. Pretty simple. It's a process of approvals essentially. And down here at the bottom on the results so far. So we had, based on the numbers, our goal over the 3 years is to reduce the real estate cost by 28%. And we may or may not hit that, but that's our goal. And we came up with what we think is a realistic plan to do that. And so the results so far are that we've been able to reduce the average of one person per 431 square feet down to 1 per 291, which I think is a big win. And the total portfolio size has been reduced by 10% just 1 year. And also in 1 year, we're already saving 7 figures. So we're off to a great start. It's a pretty complex process, and you'll see all the work that SmithGroup put into it. But so far, so good. And I'll let you guys take it from here.
So full disclosure before I get in, my dog, who is downstairs, maybe an active panelist here. So when we, SmithGroup got brought on, and we are partnering with the associates in Balfour Beatty to help develop the guideline, we took the same approach as Andrew mentioned from real estate perspective, that we took a step back and to look at the broader view. The process that we engaged with them, that we had initially proposed, which is what they wanted to go through, is to really do a deep dive in understanding who they are. We didn't want to come in and say, we know what your square footage benchmark is, target is, and this is how you can do it. We really wanted to do take the position from understanding who they are, what the unique sort of the drivers are first, in order to then come up with a unique solution. So we engaged in a sort of a research process up front that involved different methodologies to then give us enough data set to develop the strategy, then to implement as a design guideline. So part of that research method, this is kind of at a high level what we did, because we did not want to visit all the offices. We kind of actually took a suggestion from the leadership at Balfour Beatty, identifying a couple of sampling offices that would actually be a good representation of their business units and their staff. So from there, we actually did some on-site engagement with the staff and leadership level at that location, as well as doing a observation for space utilization, which I think from quantitative value perspective, I think we saw anywhere from 45 to 50% space utilization from a person perspective. And then we have some data set also output from the space use of a collaboration space. We also did a survey, online survey that was deployed to the broader audience to yet give us another data. So you can see this is showing you kind of how we started to connect the dot between quantitative and qualitative data to bridge the gap and come up with the solution. Before we started and embarked on the entire process, though, we had a leadership visioning session to really set a broader goal beyond the metrics that Andrew mentioned. While they were important they were part of the conversation and was used as a guide, we wanted to understand that this truly is an opportunity to position their real estate as an asset to really help them achieve their workplace drivers. And so these were the key goals that were identified from the beginning, and we used them as a guide throughout the process, and we also prioritized them to understand what the needs were. Some of the key drivers that came out of that initial leadership session was also important because we wanted to kind of glean what were other facets that we really want to support from workplace perspective. So without going into too much detail, you'll see sort of some consistency at the bottom. The 5 key drivers was definitely around how do we support not only the current but future talent for them to do productive work. And then also to align the real estate with not only the people, but their business strategy that they're looking at, and then to build in flexibility for the future. Then from there, we, based on all the data that we gathered, we could probably show you a 100-page report of all the different data that we gathered. We kind of pulled what are the key principles we need to utilize when we think about creating this guideline. And these are what came to the top. There are 5 principles that we used throughout the final document to really do a checkpoint on. Creating sense of community, which was an important aspect for them. How do we showcase their work and their brand, just totally infused? Providing diversity in work settings and alternate workspaces. As Andrew mentioned, they have a really diverse set of stakeholders, and we really wanted to support them in a broader way. Support mobile workforce, and I'll get into that a little bit when we show you the strategy. And then last but not least, maximizing the use with flexibility and in scale and functionality. From strategy perspective, the final strategy for US where we landed, this is a piece we included in the guideline, was to kind of position it and show sort of a reference point of where the target is, especially from sort of traditional model to the left to the agile or free address model to the right. UK falls somewhere towards the right, and recognizing where US sort of the culture and the current state is, the final recommendation ended up being somewhere in the middle with some customization and balance. So the actual strategy that was developed, I'm going to kind of go through at a high level. There's a lot of words on these pages, I recognize, but I'm going to try to highlight the approach that we took or the outcome of guiding that sort of implementation. So first and foremost, we came up with the personas, 3 primary personas for them from learning who they are. There's a nomad who are the mobile workforce that are intermittently coming into the office, maybe 1 or 2 days at the most, recognizing who they are. And we have some role examples for them. And then there's a resident teamer who's on the opposite end. They are primarily in the office. And then there's people in the middle, multi-teamer, that are perhaps in and out of the office 1 or 2 days at a time. So based on the persona identification, then we overlay the metrics. We had set a current sort of from to metrics for individual space perspective, which is what's shown on here, as well as the collaboration space metrics, which will be on the next slide. And this was a good reference point, sort of on average, based on what we learned, where they are today, and then gleaning the data on what is the effective sort of both individual and collaboration mode, what should be suggested. And it really helped them sort of set the tone for what they should be looking for. Then we overlaid also then planning principles to be able to align with some of the space kit parts that Mark is going to kind of review with you later on, to make sure the relationships of the spaces that we were developing really worked together well. And that was another important aspect, not only just the metrics and the right kit parts, but how do we reinforce such thing as they want it to be, their culture to be on display as you come through the door, for instance, which is, and then how do you create smaller neighborhoods that doesn't feel like a huge, large open office. So those were some of the layers that we put into the study. And then we also included then looking at all of their portfolio in the US, what are the scale factors from small, medium to large that might potentially then impact the relationship and how you might lay out those planning scenarios. From metric perspective, we did actually fine tune as a recommendation, sort of what the baseline might be from, ratio for the individual focus or office, whether assigned or unassigned, workstations and different typologies, mobile workers, lockers, and then the different meeting spaces that we work together. And there's some ranges that we had to sort of put in, and you'll see that to align with the persona, because we did want to give each office some customization based on who their stakeholders were. But it always kind of tied back to the overall goal that Andrew mentioned, about 200 square foot per person. And then we wanted to also kind of give, I think when you are putting together a guideline or design guide, the challenge is always to define who the audience is. And our strategy on this was to create a volume 1 and volume 2. Volume 1 is really meant for the office leadership and those who are about to embark on the project, to get them excited, but also have it be insightful so they can kind of understand how they would go about doing this. So this is a quick diagram showing how we couple the space utilization with the stakeholder engagement to really get a buy-in from the get-go, to then overlay the metrics that we have outlined. From the delivery of the project, Andrew had mentioned earlier about the gateway process, and I think this was an important piece to overlay in our guidelines. Andrew.
Yeah, so again, what was happening in the past is decentralized process. Certain processes, certain cities went better than others, and certain locations went fine, but it just wasn't consistent across the board. And so they took a step back and they said, okay, well, let's figure out all the players that need to be involved. So those are all the colorful dots at the bottom. And then they said, okay, let's simplify this. It's really four gates and then one follow-up one, but let's just gate one is, okay, does a business need a location? And if so, how many people do they need? So that was gate one. And then gate two is going out, looking at the market, and then selecting an option and saying, okay, well, this fits. It's not, it fits our geography. It's not just next to the decision maker's home. It fits all the key players involved, and it matches the image that they're trying to portray. Balfour is not typically in the nicest building on the block where top stock brokerage firms are. They're also not in the cheapest, and so they wanted a respectable location to showcase their talents and their employees. And then gate three was really the taking the time and say, okay, well, is this option still a good fit? So are we going to come out of pocket a ton of money on TIs, or does this fit, and how's the overall design look, and are we still on the same page? And then following that, then it's just approval of, okay, business still needs this, we're ready to go, and we're actually going to execute the lease. And then this is something more UK based than what we've done in the US. What they had been doing previously was doing a lessons learned. So what, you've been in the space for a few months now, what's going well, any improvements? And so it's a constant evolution of the plan, the process, and the guideline.
Thanks, Andrew. So then from our perspective, we did not want to disrupt that process that was built in robustly, but wanted to kind of overlay on top of that how we might actually add similar process that we did in understanding and developing this guideline. So this is a recommendation of engagement at the very upfront that could start to then help not only overlay and fine tune the metrics and the planning aspect, but also get an early engagement started by starting the conversation with the stakeholders. So this was another kind of recommendation we made. The last piece on this section, we did do kind of a high-level program example from small office to large in order to kind of test out our metrics. And because we recognize and we wanted to help each office recognize that not all the metrics will be purely aligned in a simple manner because of the scalability. How do we do that? And so that's where that was a reason to show them that how the small and the large scale might differ based on the metric perspective.
So before we proceed, I do see that there have been a series of questions that have come through. We have left time at the end of our presentation to field as many of those questions as we possibly can. Some hand raising as well. So if you'll bear with us for just a little bit, we'll definitely get to your questions and get back to you on that. So taking all of this, obviously, from the real estate side, from our strategy side, and putting it all together was something that I think Alexis touched on before, in putting together basically 2 volumes for Belfer that would be distributed to their office leaderships when moves were made in new lease expirations and new lease moves for new office development. And with that, the first volume was really about the strategy so that they would understand what it meant, what some of those drivers were. And it was really, and when we say guideline, we do mean guideline because the idea was it's not everything about this it's not a standard. It's really a guideline. And there is some flexibility in this. But at the same point in time, to handle overall costs from a corporate perspective, to get everybody looking like the same company, which many of us, I think, in this industry and others try to do on a daily basis as well, is that there's a feel, there's a brand, there's an understanding of when you come into our offices, how do you feel? Does it speak to the name of the firm and the understanding of who we're about and what we're about? So these volumes, again, one was the first one about process, and the second really about the details. And I'm going to go through a couple of these examples in the first volume and in the second one as well, to show you some of the detail work that goes into this and how detailed it actually gets. So I know that Alexis talked about kind of the fundamental planning that we started to take a look at and this understanding of what these spaces look like. So we really designed a hypothetical that they could use as an example and as an understanding as they were starting to look at spatial layouts and an understanding of how they would look and feel in their new spaces, and identifying this sense of entry was extremely important to Belfer Beatty. And at the same point in time, they're a very active client. They bring their clients in, they bring their partners in. And you see here off the main entry, there's a large cafe and activity space that is used for both social and work. And they do have both a lot of social and work events, very similar to, I'm sure, many who are participating in today's call. And then training and the flexibility of that, you can see the movable partitions, these ideas of a lot of those details were built into the guide plate as well, so that they can understand how that was put together or planned to be put together, including technology, et cetera. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But the idea of creating neighborhoods as well, but not only creating neighborhoods, but creating zones. And I think that many of us have found these days, especially, and this I will preface was done at the outset well before the activity of COVID. But at the same point in time, we started to look at this from that perspective as well and understand that that because of the flexibility and the agility and the mobility that they were talking about, utilization of their employees and how they were going to utilize the space, that this type of strategy actually parlayed into things that could be activated today for social distancing. So with that, the idea of these creation of neighborhoods and quiet zones and active zones and so on and so forth was extremely important to them. And you can see that kind of play out here. Again, more in plan mode. And again, the diagram that Alexis had covered in the very beginning, talking about mode of entry, movement through the space, so on and so forth. So here is, without all the bubbles and diagrams, here is that plan that you were looking at. One concept of that, which was really a 1-to-1 desk ratio that we were looking at, which still met their usable square foot per person. But at the same point in time, they were looking for choice. And so we provided a tremendous amount of choice. And in that, we got to another scenario. This is one of several that were presented. And this too took a look at a little more of a different look and feel of the way that the neighborhoods were set up, more so than anything. A differential in both furniture, but a differential in work typology, and the look and feel of the space as you were actually moving through the space. This is something that was driven very much by the director in the UK, who was very interested in, I don't want to have everybody lined up like little soldiers and so on and so forth. And I think that, a lot of that was taken into effect in this scenario playing that we did and played into, was very effective. At the end of the day, the next few slides kind of take you through the visual of what was planned for them. And again, this is a guide play. It's an understanding of what could be, but taking a lot of those strategic principles and putting them into application. Here, you start to see, the entry sequence. Obviously, their name displayed prominently. This was an example of something that they could do as a cut steel appliqué to the wall that tried to exemplify or started to exemplify their civils group. Obviously, technology was brought into play, so actively you could see their projects going on around the world. But a very open, but not a lot of seating areas and waiting areas and things like that, because they wanted to move people through the space very quickly. Here shows that open area cafe, one example of that. And at the same point in time, with these spaces, we understand, they understand, and we work through very much so this idea of acoustics and baffling and an understanding of these could be very loud and active spaces. And they do neighbor to some other spaces that are utilized for more heads down type of work. So we wanted to make sure that lighting and acoustic and connectivity to natural daylight, all the things that we're talking about on a consistent basis, and I'm sure you are too, are brought into play. And then in their open office and teaming areas, you can see one area in the center where they've got a large scale layout and gathering area. Again, this is a group that still deals with plans, excuse me, and activities such as that where they need these types of layout spaces. And on the right-hand side, you kind of see some movement and waves in the walls. This idea of a graphic was just more of a display, and there were in the diagram booklets that were given to them. There were other examples, and I'll hit on one of those as well, as far as what could be this idea of portraying, again, a natural landscape, some of their construction projects, so on and so forth. But to, again, always remind the organization and people who were working there what was happening within the organization, who they were, and regionally what they were about. So this was some clippings from that book that kind of showed them areas like huddle rooms and private offices, of which they had very little, conference areas, etc., just so that they had a very comprehensive understanding of everything that was going on in the space. So the second book was basically made up of space typologies and guide plates, and I'll move through this pretty quickly. but just to give you an understanding of what the level of detail was. And the importance of this really came down to, again, setting the stage and working with them as groups. This came all the way from discussions that we had that Alexis talked about in our initial stages, getting an understanding of the type of workstations that they thought would be very accessible, very acceptable for all of their staff, both fixed from all personas. So you can see here that we start to talk about individual collaboration and team, multi-purpose and flex, public and social spaces, and amenity and resources. And we get into details about each one of these particular areas within the guide plate. Here you start to see what some of those options are. And at the same point in time, because this guide is supposed to help them along with understanding what they talk to us about and what those philosophical examples at the very beginning they were trying to get across, the relationship between the typology of persona and the furniture itself. So you start to see examples in detail. And obviously these get very detailed as to the typology, and you see the sit-stand desks, you see the armatures for the computer typology. Most of their offices and most of their people work with 2 monitors. So we wanted to give an active and real portrayal of what we understood. But at the same point in time, give them an understanding of what the flexibility could be. So here's another example of that in a different size workstation and a little bit of a slightly different configuration. There was a multitude of these, and this book was comprised of about a little over 100 pages of information that they could use as the guide plate. So this strong kit of parts that build every single space typology, again, was a piece of this book that was put together as well. Here's an example of collaboration spaces, from huddle rooms to training rooms. You know, giving the layperson an understanding, even though they're in the industry, this is an idea of there are some people who actively do not work consistently with designing spaces, understanding spaces, building spaces. So to give them a really good comprehensive understanding of what these spaces are all about. And then the details again. Some more. And again, this goes all the way down to certain specifications. But also at the same point in time, these are good guide plates for them to be able to go out and get an understanding of some preliminary pricing based on size and square footage of the new office typology. And then finally, some design elements that start to get into finish levels, again, giving them a better understanding of brand, colorization. This idea of building really a neutral background and palette to work from with all the major surfaces within the space, but at the same point in time, flexibility for them to do some other applications that become much more both regional and personal to them and to their offices. Here again, another example of that. And then specifically into furniture and the specifics about furniture. And so these things were meshed and tested and so on and so forth before being put into the document. Lighting, very important factor, obviously, in all of our environments. Something that we wanted to emphasize to them as well, but to give them the examples to carry through. And finally, really graphics and branding. And this was one of the examples that we chose out of another project that we had done here in Phoenix for the United Way, which was extremely effective. And I think it got the point across to them. And there were several examples of this, as you can imagine, in the book, that gave this idea of, for United Way, one of the things it was about storytelling. And it was about talking about the people that they're serving on a daily basis. And I think that was really important and resonated with Belfer as well. And so that would be the guide for this understanding of what type of graphics and branding that we would use within the space.
So as you can see, that's kind of a great overview of the package that we put together. We're kind of coming around full circle. We started out with some metrics. We did share as part of the conversation in developing where the target needs to be, some of these benchmarks, fully understanding that's what's done in the past, but for them to be able to kind of get a temperature gauge. And so we did that from the individual space perspective to the collaboration perspective, and then also from the usable square foot perspective. So these two pieces are in there. Mark, if you can advance, thank you. So they were really interested in where they might fall, where that would lead us, and so this was a guide. But I am hoping that from throughout this whole presentation and what we presented to you today, that ultimately our whole approach and the partnership between the associates, Barfoot, Beatty, and us, SmithGroup, was to really think broader, right? And to really impact and find the opportunity from real estate asset perspective, how that could actually propel where Balfour Beatty wanted to go. So next slide, Adam, is kind of a wrap up to kind of remind all of us that what we started out with was to really support these key principles to create a sense of community, showcasing their brand, choosing kind of, giving choices to people based on their diverse work modes, and then supporting mobility, which is a critical factor. I think one of the questions I just saw was about, this is pre-COVID, but it really, the whole agility model, free address model, does set them up to be much more readily adapted to the unknown. And then last but not least, building in flexibility. So hopefully you were able to see that story come together.
So that concludes our presentation. See that there's a series of questions, and so we're going to at this point in time we'll take a look at some of those and try to answer those for you. Most of them, obviously, as you can imagine, surround themselves around COVID and post-COVID. I'll
start on that, Mark.
Yeah, let's do that. What's that now?
I'll start on that. It's a totally easy question, right? Right. So again, this is a guideline, and it's going to evolve. It's a living, breathing document. So as of right now, it's far from, oh gosh, we got to drastically change this this guideline, and we spent all this time and effort for nothing. It's nothing like that. What they're doing is they've got a come back to work plan, and they're going to be doing split shifts for now and tweaking the plans and trying to ensure safety, looking at building systems. But the general consensus, what I'm hearing from the business folks, is, hey, eventually we will get back to normal, and this thing will calm down. And we do still want to right size. We still want to have cool space. We want to have collaboration. We get that people will want to work mobile, maybe a few extra days a week, at least for now, and gradually that'll go down, but maintain that going forward. And so those are the types of conversations that are happening versus, all right, call up Mark and Alexis and let's start from scratch. Nothing like that.
Yeah, just to add to that, Andrew. So I think even though when we put this together, we did not know what was coming. You saw that the two planning example that Mark showed, as well as understanding the persona, sort of pushing the demographic that were ready for agile or free address, building that into the program already. It actually put them in a really good place to be ready for what we're experiencing right now. Coupled with that, if you think about the metrics that we connected from collaboration perspective, I think somebody asked about, wouldn't that be just coming in? I think there's a lot of question right now, certainly about would people be just coming in to do collaboration only? That is not the case. We are trying to make sure, I think even through pandemic and post-pandemic, you're going to still have the need for both individual work and collaboration. And if you look at the overall metric, they're at 50-50 almost. So I think space typology-wise, there's enough there. Again, the choices and diversity, we believe, could kind of set them in the right direction. Obviously, we have to layer on other factors now that we know more about how to address COVID.
So hopefully that has some of the answers that you had addressed really the COVID issues. I'll go off key on one question that came up that said, for consistency's sake, did we use one dealer to service the account? One of the things that we definitely tried to look at was an idea of standardization on product typology. And with that, because of the region and because of the relationships that Belfer Beatty actually have, we left that open. More than likely, the idea was the package that we put together was a very comprehensive from a standpoint of both from most of the ancillaries to open line, which most dealerships have the ability to effectuate. And then the idea was we gave some standard product typology specifications to them so that they could make a very easy selection between 3 to 4 either select dealers that they had relationships with or had could bid out to.
There's a question about how long this effort took to put this together from SmithGroup side. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think we took about 2.5 months or 3 months at the most.
That's correct, from start to finish. And again, part of that was due to some of the travel to getting to these locations and understanding and meeting with people in 2 different locations in the States. But yes, about a 2 to 3 month effort. And then after that, we've been engaged with the organization, as Andrew had talked about, to effectuate some of the newer spaces that have been happening around the country.
And Andrew, your scope took how long?
Oh gosh, that's a really, really good question. So
Sorry,
the whole plan, probably 3 months of going to visit each city and meeting with all the decision makers there, and then putting this big package together that I thought was long up until I saw your package. So probably a good 3 months and a lot of Southwest flights.
There's a very interesting question that I'll start, but I don't know if I can actually answer because there's been so much discussion around this. But it talks about what time frames are we hearing being discussed on when things may start to return to quote unquote normal in the office space. And I think if none of us at this point in time have a crystal ball, but obviously we need to make some assumptions and we need to advise our clients and our partners on what those best practices are. And I think that what we have as an organization and what we're seeing from others are starting to put together real strategic plans that start to take a look at, again, some of the other questions that are actually embedded in here that talk about air exchange, air filtering, the use of UV lights, et cetera, that I'm sure many of you have heard about in implementing cycles in both your existing and potential new workspaces. All of those things are being looked at as employment and getting those effectuated in spaces. But at the same point in time, I think that the return policy to getting back to a normal is on 2 different spectrums. And very honestly, I'm hearing really 2 schools of thought. That in some capacity there's hope for our future, and this idea is that there will be a vaccine at some point in time, and that it will help to both mitigate and calm kind of what is going on that we're dealing with right now in the world with this pandemic, and that through that over time that there may be a return to normalcy in some form of a year, or maybe even a little more. But until that point in time, I think the safety factor and this idea of wearing masks, social distancing, figuring out ways to be collaborative and working in that environment is going to be our normal for quite some time. And I think that even speaking for us, we are still in very much a work from home aspect. Thankfully, we've had a lot of abilities to work through technology in a great many ways that have allowed us to stay on track, keep in touch with our clients and our partners and as trusted advisors. But at the same point in time, it's every day. It's the challenge of how do we make that work for all of us, and how do we stay with it? So again, I don't necessarily think that I've completely answered your question, but I don't know if there's truly a solid answer for that. But Alexis, Andrew.
To add to that, yeah, I was just going to add one conversation we've been having with our clients. While we do have, if you don't know, maybe you can go to our website. We do have an immediate service sort of to test out with the application on 6-foot distancing, all of that. But regardless of that, the conversation we've been having with the client is much more about the new paradigm shift about what is that new work. It's not going to be about returning to the normal, because the new normal has completely changed. And so it's about defining what that might look like by different organization and their culture to really then guide the solution is one aspect that we've been focusing on. So I just wanted to layer that on. There's a question that I just saw at the bottom about how do you engage the staff and to make sure that they are part of the process, especially when your organization is driven that way. Hopefully you saw the way we did the research initially was definitely covering that ground. So we had workshops not only at the manager or leadership level, but we had it at the staff level. We also had an online survey that got distributed across the board so that sort of creates a broader conversation. But we also recommended in the guidelines to really engage the staff from the very get-go. And many of the pieces that were the design solutions in our package came from actually listening to the staff because they are the talent that they want to keep, and so to think about the talent that will be the future. So I just wanted to answer that one. I know we're at a 3-minute mark.
Yeah, so I know that we are running close to our time. So at this point, I do know that Monica has some closing remarks. What I'd like to say is we'd like to very much thank you for joining us today. Hopefully this was informative. Obviously our information is here if you want to contact us to further understand or better understand these questions. I don't necessarily know if there is, but I'm going to follow up with Merchandise Smart Properties and Monica to talk about if there are ways for us to take these questions and actually get them back to somebody on a posted site, because we would love to do that for you. So any that we didn't answer today, we apologize for that, but again, we appreciate your time. And with that, I'll turn it over to Monica.
Thank you, Mark and Andrew and Alexis. That was really a very, very unique and impressive project, and we appreciate you sharing it with us. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Please join us tomorrow for the 21st Century Classroom. Have a good day and be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.